Well, thank you very much for coming along today. We're excited about this session. In fact, I was so excited that I wanted to share it. So I asked my good friend Nick. Nick has extensive experience, not just from 5am and Bubs, Mars and Heinz as well. And you're working with a whole lot of businesses right now.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I suppose after building brands and building their revenue and their commercial operations, I see lots of businesses with wonderful opportunities, but you only know what you know. And I think that's the beauty of a session like today. Hopefully we can add some, little secrets that maybe help unlock other opportunities for your business. So NCS is a specialty little boutique advisory and investment, and I work with different businesses to help them realise their potential.
All right. So, and as Export Connect is concerned, we've now delivered over 100 export projects for more than 70 clients. 20 of those are stakeholders like government agencies, industry associations and the like, but we've done work for, we've delivered work for more than 50 food businesses, from as large as Chobani and Woolworths, who have Export Co within their portfolio, all the way through to someone who's looking to start a new brand and have one eye on export from the very first day. So been privileged to work with a lot of businesses and understand what their needs are. And so what we've put together today is a really practical step-by-step process on giving a buyer, and by buyer we mean either a retail buyer, distributor or importer, a reason to believe in your product, a reason to take it on, to make it compelling so that they've got no other choice but to say yes or no, but not ever in between. I set up first for this session the 3 core pillars that go towards giving a reason to believe. And in this one here, I'm actually going to start from right to left. So having an Arabic background, I read from right to left. So I'm going to go right to left here. In order to get to a reason to believe, you have to be able to demonstrate a point of difference. Because if you can't make the buyer understand how you're different to what they already have on the shelf, the only way you're going to be able to compete is on price. And if the only way you're going to compete on price, then you're probably not going to get good profit margins. It's probably not going to be a sustainable business. And then the next person in that category that comes along that's cheaper than you will kick you off the shelf. So you really got to show that you're different, a reason to believe. And in order to be able to demonstrate that point of difference, you have to know who your competitors are. If you can't articulate who your competitors are in a buyer appointment and show how you're different and where your value comes from, the buyer will always have doubt and will always feel like they can come in on a strong negotiation sort of stage. Is that your experience?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you have to remember the buyer's job is to actually try and put you off your game. Remember, they're just trying to do their job as well. So you need to be really clear in what you stand for and, I suppose, what you bring to the retailer. And I think what's really important about this identify your competitor area is that many of the initial export markets that many businesses from Australia go to, they source globally. If you go to Singapore is a prime example. It's they take the best from the world. So, what you may believe is your competitor from, the little sphere that we live in, Australia and New Zealand, as an example, well, you need to look broader than that to really actually understand what that means.
So if we go to identify competitors, so now we're going to be doing the left to right. So we'll start with the identify competitors and build towards the reason to believe. There are 2 key ways you can do that. You can do it using online resources, and by online resources, this means going and onto the retailers that you're looking to target, their online stores, actual online platforms. You can go to all sorts of publications. So if you subscribe to publications, whether it be by category, by channel, by market, social media. find out what your competitors are doing on social media. What is it that they're promoting mostly? What are they demonstrating as their points of difference? Go to market research. So there's some that are available just through Googling. There are some resources from Austrade and Austrade equivalents from other countries like New Zealand, Canada, the US. Tradeport is a good website. Often those websites incorporate Euromonitor data and statistics, which if you were to buy it yourself would cost a whole lot of money. And then, of course, once through social media and all these avenues, you've identified who your key competitors are, then go to their websites and drill as deep as you can. How would you have gone about competitor analysis?
Oh, in the good old days, used to jump on an aeroplane and go and walk store to store.
Well, that's the next one.
Yeah, okay, sorry, we'll get to that. But really, nothing beats actually getting in market and actually standing back and actually watching how people shop the category as well. I think that's another thing. One that you didn't mention, which I think is an opportunity for many businesses now, is Amazon. So Amazon have a commitment to having the broadest range of products. They have a commitment to not being beaten on price. So let's say you want to see who your competitors are in Australia. The reality is on any given day, you should be able to see the widest view of products with the real-time pricing of what they are in the market, best pricing in the market, because Jeff and his team have spent billions running algorithms that run across the web and grab this information all the time. So that's another great resource you can use.
All right. So talking about going overseas and going into the supermarket, when you conduct an on-shelf audit, so first of all, it's important to see how the retailers set up their store and your category in particular. Is your category, are products in your category shared across the deli, the checkout counter, as well as where your competitors are all housed on shelf? You need to have a look at what are the brands? What country do they come from? What are the pack sizes? What type of packaging do they use? Is it glass, plastic, paper? Is it small packaging, large packaging? What does it retail for? You need to, in many markets like Asia and the Middle East, they actually have who the importer is on the packaging. So start documenting and developing a database of which distributors carry which products. And then later on, and it won't be covered in this topic, you start looking at your market entry strategies. And do you want to use the same distributors or do you want to use complementary ones? So if you've got it, don't just have a look at your category, especially when you're looking at from an importer data perspective. Have a look at some of the others, because you may be able to appoint one of those importers to look after your product if they don't have any of your category in their portfolio. You need to look at what promotions are being run. Are they being discounted? Are they being banded? Are they on gondola ends? Is there tastings going on? Do they have product islands? Is it in the catalogue? Many of these supermarkets still have hard catalogues. So before you walk into the supermarket, pick up the catalogue and see what's in there. Do you have competitors in there? If not, do you see your product fitting in that catalogue? Nick?
I think to Helen's point about culturally before, the understanding of, especially is more important in certain categories, but purity, so shelf life is really important. For instance, in a previous life, I launched Rafferty's Garden baby food into mainland China, and you get to a point where freshness is everything. So you could actually imagine you've got the best from America, the best from Europe, the best from Australia, the best from New Zealand, and whoever has the freshest shelf life on the shelf, consumers will buy that because they believe that's pure and safer than anything else. So your sales can be going along beautifully, but then all of a sudden they'll stop. And then all of a sudden you need to clear it, and it becomes your problem because the retailer's going to come back to you. So really understand the shelf life through that supply chain right through to consumer purchase, because that is a very underestimated competitive difference.
And from a perspective of margins, So, I mean, I guess, we're fortunate because over time we've ended up traveling to so many markets and figured out what all the margins are. How do you feel someone may be able to try to identify the margins in a market if they hadn't been in the market before?
Again, depending on your route to market, and I think what's interesting with a number of the initial markets that you would choose to participate in, a lot of the retailers actually do importation themselves. So they'll work through consolidators or they'll actually consolidate themselves. So that's really easy. Then you're really just having a margin conversation with that retailer. If you're going to sell to a distributor who is then going to actually on-sell that, the reality is you need to understand what services they are offering. So for instance, 5am Organic, calling on every store every week, 3 times a week, merchandising, rotating stock, doing all that. I mean, that comes at a cost. However, it delivers a superior output. So the benefit for the slightly increased retail price point to actually deliver that service was worth it at that particular point in time. So really understanding what you're getting, what services are being offered, and really being able to benchmark that against different markets to make sure that, because the only thing that does, if the margins are too high, it just pushes the retail price point through the roof and it just affects rate of sale and the product performance, which effectively comes back to you.
A couple of years ago when I was in Singapore, I saw your distributor driving around with 5am trucks. Was that a big investment?
Oh, Melvin was here before. It was actually nice to see him. Actually, not at all. The beauty with that, I think that was maybe $4,000 it cost in the scheme of things. But in a market like Singapore, that works, right? Because that little truck drives around a really small area, and so the frequency of that brand message is really powerful. But if you're in certain other markets, that wouldn't make sense.
Right. So then once you've got all this data about your competitors and you've got a pretty good feel as to where you're positioned, you then have to understand what's your point of difference. Is it going to be the claims? Is the point of difference that your product is a functional food? Does it have health attributes that none of the other products have? To your point on shelf life, is it a case of some buyers want to have maximum shelf life despite consumers wanting to see short shelf life? Is it the convenience of your product, the way that it's packed, the way that it's merchandised? Is it around trust? Is there a provenance story that from where it's from the ingredients used that makes the consumer want to buy the product? Is it the way you promote your product? Do you have a unique social media platform that you use that's different to the others? Or is it going to come down to value for money? Basically, your product is good value for money in comparison to who you've benchmarked yourself against on shelf. In Australia, we're seen as a high-cost manufacturer, but to a certain extent, European and North American products are too. And they're our competitors. And with the Australian dollar where it is at the moment, we can actually present value sometimes just based on that. Nick?
Absolutely. All the businesses that I'm involved in, and probably have been involved in since 5am, have a unique point of difference. So 5am, we had the largest organic milk source to make yogurt. We could scale when others couldn't. Bubs, we acquired the largest goat dairy operation to have vertical integration to be able to show from paddock to plate effectively for the Chinese marketplace. I mean, these things are really important, but you need to understand the cultural component of it too. So what do you need to dial up and what do you need to dial down? It could be convenience is a prime example, pack size, how people consume the product. 5am yogurt. In Australia, we snack on yogurt. Yogurt is a dessert. So 170 grams for the Asian palate is actually too much. The portion size is too great. So that should be in 100 grams. So it's some of those things and your ability to be able to adapt and actually just be able to be really clear rather than just sell what you make, I think goes a long way in really getting the retailers behind your product as well.
All right, so you've done your online research. It was enough to give you the encouragement to go and invest in the cost of going to the market. You've done your on-shelf audit. You're feeling pretty good. You're feeling like you have a place. You might have a point of difference. You then have to start building your pitch and figuring out what's that reason to believe the buyer, why would they want your product? And the messages could be around, and this is and when you look at reasons to believe, there's basically three key partners in this. There's the consumer themselves, there's the buyer or the retailer, distributor, the channel, and then of course there's your own business. You've got to have a reason to believe to be in that market in the first place. From a consumer, generally they're looking for either it could be a message of convenience, it could be the functionality, the health attributes, it could be that you're using sustainable packaging that makes them feel like that you're the type of product that they want. It could be fair trade, it could be premium nature of the product, the value, provenance story. In Asia and to an extent the Middle East, coming from Australia is a really positive message. I found out the other day that in America, they also see Australia as a very positive message. The UK, they don't care too much about the fact that it's from Australia. They see that and it's just like that it's come from a very long distance away from home.
They will with Brexit though.
Yes. And then there's personalisation of products. So these are all, I guess, high-level trends that consumers are looking for. But what is it that you're touching? What reason to believe are you giving to the consumer? You have to be able to articulate what that point is. For 5 a.m., what was the reason to believe for a consumer?
Organic, purity and great taste. At the end of the day, I think to be able to be clear with what your value proposition is for a market, there's a lot of things you can do that actually don't cost a lot of money. That are, social media and those things are really important. So imagine to be able to do a little bit of social listening, you actually start to understand that people are talking about the category 25 to 40-year-old females, as an example. You'll get some attributes off that. It'll help you build a persona. You can then go and grab some census data that's actually free. You can flush that back and say, so let's use Singapore as an example. Okay, how big is that potential audience as my first start? And so therefore, when you're having a conversation, you can actually then go and do some quant research on that and just do some really basic surveying to understand the priority of your on-pack claims, or, what are the things that really resonate with them. It only needs to be a small sample, and it's really easy to do, but it goes a huge way to actually helping you build a compelling argument for the retailer as well.
And so then from a buyer's perspective, you've got to be sure that you're nailing the trends within the category, within that market. They're going to want to see the margins. They may ask for exclusivity. Lead times, depending on the markets, are very sensitive when they come around that.
New line fees.
New line fees, yes. Shelf life, minimum order quantities. In particular, some of the smaller Asian markets, which are great markets for us to start with, they're prepared to trial the product a pallet at a time. Australian manufacturers, food exporters, generally are very, not very accommodating when it comes to that. And that often stops a lot of new brands from getting into an export market. Now, the thing is, it could very quickly or slowly get to much more significant volumes, but you've got to start with the first order. Being flexible around that is a key. Activation, we're talking about there in terms of promotions, social media, sampling, tastings. After a period of time, maybe going and exhibiting at their big shows to get some more buyers on board. New product development, demonstrating, if you can, that you're very flexible in the way that you will approach the market, that you will change your pack size if that's required. You will modify the packaging if that's required, the labels, whatever it might be. You may start with over-stickering to get going, and then if it's proven right, develop a label specifically for that market. And it might even be the packaging. You may actually have beautiful display boxes that makes it easier for the retailer, that they just have to peel the top off and put it on the shelf. so many reasons for a buyer to believe. And if you can articulate these clearly in the meeting, you're going to really be taking a big leap ahead. Nick?
Absolutely. And I think what's really important to understand is don't believe you're going to jump on a plane, have one meeting and come home with an order. I think you want to do the background work, and you do a lot of this work, and you go to the retailer and you're saying, this is what I see. This is the opportunity that I see. I would be interested in your take on that. And they will give you feedback because they're buyers. So you'll get that, and you sort through what's important and what's not important, or what you can do and what you can't do, and then refine your offer and go back. But go back in a timely manner, because one of the things buyers dislike is when you come to town once a year. They just think you're not serious. So the point is, engage them in the process. So do the work, engage them in the process, get some feedback, adapt appropriately, go back and present and say, based on your feedback, this is what we believe the size of the opportunity is, and this is how we want to work together. And you'll be amazed by just that proactivity, right? And you invest early in time and relationship. Though, I have friendships that span over a decade, and it's amazing where people end up. They used to be the international buyer, now they're the head of all health and wellness for the biggest supermarket chain in Singapore, as an example. So they're good relationships to build.
And then from a business perspective, so you may be looking after the consumer and you may be looking after the buyer, and that could be very easy to do. Sell loads of containers for free, and you'll be doing really good sale. Well, you wouldn't even be doing sales. You'll be moving a lot of product, but it won't be profitable for your business. So you've got to look at it. Is it going to be good for you from a revenue perspective? Is it going to be good for you from a profitability perspective? Will the export sales drive more economies of scale through your production, additional sales, additional markets that you otherwise wouldn't have had, and driving some of your costs down through the economies of scale? Diversifying markets. If some of your markets and channels in Australia or in some parts of the world are down and you've got other markets up, can help balance it. If you're importing product, then exporting product becomes a natural balance to your foreign exchange. Benchmarking, going to markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, although I wouldn't recommend going to Hong Kong right now, but markets like that, you're seeing pretty much the best of the world all in the one market. Spread over 3, you're probably going to see 75% of the best food manufacturers in the world in your category. So it gives you a bit of insight and vision yourself on what development you can do with your product and what improvement you need to make to be able to compete at that level. You get global branding. At the moment, you're sort of a little bit in the investment space as well. And if you've got an Australian product that's doing well here and in overseas market, it adds more credibility. It makes it a more investable type of brand. And then, of course, getting into export builds your capability. Either you individually, if you're the business owner and you're having to juggle that responsibility with everything else you do in the business, or whether you bring that capability into your company from which you can bounce ideas off each other. Nick, from a business perspective?
Absolutely. One thing that I want to make clear is, the internet has obviously made the marketplace very different. The transparency of pricing of what you sell for here in Australia automatically sets an expectation with what your pricing can be in different channels, in different marketplaces. So don't believe you can sell something here for $1 and walk into a retailer overseas and go, it's $5, right? You need to be realistic. You need to be like Apple and actually have your global pricing figured out. It's not difficult to do, but the reality is you need to do that, because if you go and you are too ambitious, you actually erode your credibility straight off the bat. So I think that's really important to make sure that you get that right. And I think the other thing is, think about foes. So if you're a retailer in Southeast Asia and Alibaba's investing in Lazada and e-commerce is a threat, how are you going to explain your participation in e-commerce in that marketplace to the bricks and mortar retailer? So you have to think about the whole ecosystem and the channel and how that actually works together for them to actually give you that credibility, knowing that you've thought through and have a realistic proposition.
I want to have some reverse questions here, because I can see a few friends in the audience. Guy, and I think there's a microphone there. So guys with... Actually, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself before I ask the question?
Sure. Guy Thompson with the ANZ International Business Development Team. We support mid-market customers to expand offshore, both for product exports, imports, and offshore businesses like services as well.
So you've taken, like over the past year, there've been a few market visits where you've taken several businesses over. They're not all just food, but if we just focus on the food perspective, how do you find the businesses that are part of your program go about ascertaining information about their competitors when they go on this visit, and how do you see that benefit them along the way?
Interesting point there around competition. I think when a lot of sort of mid-market businesses are looking at their sales and their strategy in the Australian market, the ability to get into Coles and Woolies and have good shelf space and be doing good turnover is seen as obviously really positive and something that you need in order to get to the next stage to be able to export offshore. But then once you get offshore, everything is brand Australia. You all need to actually be working together and collaborating with each other to actually get that shelf space in China or Singapore or Hong Kong. So I think if companies are able to collaborate with each other to sort of share some of those insights around their journey into Asia markets, that's really beneficial. But also then working with the experts on the ground in places like Shanghai or Singapore to find out what the secrets are for that particular market and what the steps are that they need to do. Even if they're large enough to already been distributed on the ground, are they actually going about everything the right way? Do they need to audit what they're doing and get a second opinion?
Have you collaborated through the different brands that you've worked with?
I have, absolutely. I've even collaborated with other businesses in Australia, actually. We actually shared a vendor replenishment planner with a couple of other businesses at Woolworths, actually. By ourselves, we couldn't afford it, but collectively we could, and it was transformative for the business and the relationship with that account. Export's exactly the same. Actually, I think the bond's actually probably even tighter. Like there's a really lovely community of food and beverage businesses exporting, and everyone is very helpful, and we'll look to actually help each other as well. And I think that's something that you should take advantage of.
And we have some questions come through on the phone, but if I could just ask Cheryl from More Life, so we need to get the just that point on collaboration, because Cheryl, I know you've participated in trade shows, you've participated in market visit programs. You're in fact going on an amazing Export Connect market visit program next month. What are your feelings around travelling as a group? Is there a benefit and value in doing that?
Yes, I've done quite a bit of travelling overseas in groups, and I tend to gain a lot of insights and information from other export managers, particularly ones that aren't in direct competition with me. We're a lot more open and we co-share a lot of information, and we actually even co-share leads to an extent as well, and introductions. We do joint email introductions as well. So definitely travelling with a group has got a lot of advantages.
Great.
Great.
Okay, Helen.
Okay. Fantastic questions, and we've got a couple up on the app, so we'll check those out. A little bit similar, the first one, to the one you just answered. What do you think the value of trade shows are to develop your competitor analysis?
Okay. So trade shows are a great resource to understand interest in your product. Trade shows are great for you to walk the aisles yourself and see who your competitors are and how they're pitching their products. If you're new to export, I recommend going to a trade show as a visitor, not exhibiting, because you can make a lot of mistakes. If you don't already know your pitch before you get up on the shelf, if you haven't done all the homework that we've just said and actually had a reason to believe, and know that it can happen after you've done all this homework, that you sit there and you go, actually, our product is not going to work in this market, or for this to work, I'm not going to make any money out of it, go to another market. And if after several markets you find you don't have an opportunity, well then it may be that that's just the case. So I think from a trade show perspective, it's important that you go as a visitor and get all that information if you're new to export. If you're already exporting into that market, you already have a distributor, then yes, go to the trade show and sell to other retailers that your distributor may not be currently delivering product to. Nick, do you have any?
To elaborate, I'm a little bit harsher than that. You don't enter a market unless you know who your customer is. Simple as that. So how you're going to get it to the customer, well, that's a different discussion, but you need to know, for instance, who the retailers are, how many stores you actually should be in, because the relevance of your products, and it comes back to actually understanding what that addressable market opportunity is. And I think that's really clear, because otherwise you're not measuring yourself against any performance criteria. Really, you're probably just going away for some chili crab and cold beer, right? So and there's nothing wrong with that either, I'll say. But I think that's really important to actually understand who your customer is.
Great, good question. The next one is, how do you think technology has affected how brands build a competitor analysis?
Actually, Nick, I'll get you to start with this one, because this is a little bit of a pet project of yours. You sure you didn't get somebody to plant this?
No, I left that to you. So I think I mentioned before about Amazon, right? Amazon's, got an amazing view of the world where they want the broadest range, they want the best price in market. It's a great way to actually do a huge amount of desktop research, which is timely and accurate. In markets such as China, it's totally different. You don't think for a moment that you can't present to someone and they're not going to pull up the Tmall store or the cheapest Taobao price that they can find and say, but wait a second, this is 188 and you're telling me it's 248. No, that's not right. So, and they're all leverages to actually try and increase their margin, and they're just trying to do their job. So, I think technology has brought a global transparency to the market that has never been there before, and you need to be aware of that and understand that when you're doing your pricing model to sell to the likes of Coles and Woolworths and retailers in this country, that actually that has a significant impact on what your pricing strategy needs to be in other markets as well.
There is also, and this is something that we're starting to explore in Australia, and in some instances we're getting good at it, is using the nationals from the markets that we're trying to export to, that are in Australia and maybe studying, visiting, whatever it might be, tapping into them and finding out what do they like about your product in comparison to what they've been buying back home. Did you ever utilise a resource like that in your time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with a slight deviation from that, it's called the Daigou marketplace, right? Responsible for about 480 million worth of sales for A2 this year. So at the end of the day, I think that's a wonderful opportunity to get in and understand the cultural differences of what your product and really what you should call up and call down. But they can also be great advocates for you in the world of key opinion leaders and influencers. And funnily enough, throughout many parts of Asia, they're actually also the retailer. I mean, there's 6 million Taobao accounts within the Alibaba network, and each of them are selling products that they don't make. So at the end of the day, they get the order, they walk into Chemist Warehouse or another retailer, or go to Costco and actually order it off the catalogue as an example, and then they ship it. So I think at the end of the day, there's 180,000, I think, Chinese students in Australia, and there's many more from many other countries. And I think absolutely that's a wonderful resource that should be tapped into.
Helen,
Yes.
so you specialise in Indonesia. From a cultural perspective, and from what you've studied and know and practice, if you were advising a food company about selling their product into Indonesia, what are the factors that you would get them to think about in terms of being able to understand whether they have an opportunity, and how would they build that into their pitch?
When it comes to Indonesia, what we talk a lot about is relationship building. And it's not really about how good your product is or what kind of amazing business plan you have or even what the price point is. What you actually need to do first is go there and start meeting people and start building relationships with the people that you think can be your business partners. And it's about establishing trust. It's very much a market where trust is built up over time. And once you have that trust, it's, as you were saying, Nicholas, 10 years down the track, they'll still be connected to you and an opportunity might arise from that. So that's the first thing that we suggest. It's just getting to know the people and the culture and the country. And interesting that you mentioned the younger students or people from other countries who are in Australia and using them as a resource. China is often a prime example. But what we do in our business is we bring in interns and we ask for interns from different countries. We specifically ask for interns who are not of Australian background, or if they're Australian, they have an Asian ethnicity. And that's been amazing. We've had Singapore, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the insight that gives us has been very helpful. They're just young, smart people who can help you understand better the culture of the country that you're thinking about going into. And it's a great way to get to know a different culture or start getting to know a different culture, but also to connect with some younger thinking about what is the consumer.
And from a practical perspective, we have interns that work with us. Again, very bright. 50% of the interns that work with us are international students studying business. And often when we work on research projects, I ask them for their opinion on the products that we're undertaking the research for.
Yeah.
Craig, so you were with Sunrise. Actually, if you don't mind introducing yourself a little bit, and then just your feedback on competitor analysis. You were more on the marketing side than the sales side. Well, how would you figure out, how did you understand what you needed to do to drive the sales for Sunrise?
Yeah, so Craig Young, I ran the international marketing side for Sunrise for last little while. Sunrise, obviously Australian rice company, but was or has been for many times Australia's largest branded food exporters, depending on whether we're in drought or not. Middle East actually is the biggest part of the Sunrise business. We sold more rice in the Middle East than in Australia. Very old, established. I've been there for sort of 40 years. Similar Hong Kong, Singapore, 40 odd years. And so there's a real growth agenda to then grow Pacific Islands as well, so 30, 40 years in the Pacific Islands. So, and it's very similar to what you were talking about. So a lot of what I was doing was not just rice, because we were doing value adding to rice, so rice-based snacks, convenience rice, so things that were very different into those markets, so not just the typical staple foods, but things that are in added value categories or slightly new categories. And but a lot of it was a lot of the things you mentioned here today. So a lot of it was the initial desk research. It's amazing what is on Google in terms of published research reports or category reports or market reports. So it's mining those online, the websites for the retailer, so you do understand your competitors, the pack sizes, claims, flavours. The big thing on a lot of these things is flavours. So the products that we have in Australia, you think are fabulous, but are the flavours really right for those markets? So you've really got to go and understand what's there, and you can do that easily online before you really spend any money on that. And it's really the thing that Sunrise was very fortunate about was distributor relationships. So excellent distributor relationships, most of which had been 2 generations or 40 years. So you get a lot of insight there, but in a lot of cases where we're moving into value-add categories that they weren't used to, had to go and find a new distributor. And that's actually a question I was going to ask you, because I think that was probably the hardest part, was how do you build a short list of distributors in each of these markets? I think it's a really tough part. But I think everything else you've said there's been really good. But and getting to the markets and learning a lot is key. And the cultural part as well, I think, is really important. You learn very quickly that you've really got to get in and show that respect and be open to learning. And from that, people open up to you, and you learn a lot more from them. So I'll finish with my question if I can about
Yeah.
how you build a short list of potential distributors in some of these markets.
Well, fortunately, over 25 years, I've got a long list of distributors and retailers that I can call upon. And that's all been through going to the market. There's also help available. Austrade is a resource. You have, in the case of Victoria, Victorian office has offices overseas, as do most of the state agencies. Early on in the piece, I was documenting all the importers' details that were on products, and then finding out how I could access the buyers from there. Doing it yourself will take a little bit longer, but you can get help. It's not expensive to get help, and that'll accelerate it. And especially if the help you have has relationships with those buyers, because most buyers are very busy. They're no different overseas than they are here. And if they see an email coming from a name that's familiar to them, or in the case of Asia, a WhatsApp message, because most of my Asian buyers on my database, I WhatsApp them. I don't email them. They won't respond to the email.
That's right.
So I think, WeChat for China. Nick, do you have something you want to?
Yeah, it's not a gratuitous plug, but Export Connect did a piece of work for me when I was at Bubs, and we wanted to look at actually transcending that distributor model. So we actually started with the retailer where we had the relationships. We went back from that in regards to the supply chain requirements, and then we basically benchmarked traditional distributors versus more new age, where I actually had a 3PL in the market. And we actually looked at the different cost per serve models and how we would manage inventory that could scale, but more importantly, control inventory, because, the two main pieces of information I'd give to anybody is you are the custodian of your brand. No one loves your brand more than you. Just know that and believe that every day, because it's so true. The other thing is, don't push too much stock into any market. Make air freight your friend. Small, frequent, yep. And when the volume's there, move into freight, into traditional freight. But if there's not too much volume in the market, you can't make too many mistakes. No one needs to drop the price to half price to clear a vast amount of quantity, right? So it actually protects you and your brand absolutely going forward as well.
We've got a question. I think we've got time for one more. And this is around, I guess, consumer trends. With the increase in plant-based meat, how long can real meat, traditional meat, continue to be competitive? What does the approach need to be like? Now, this is really, this is one of the cutting-edge questions, isn't it? An old legacy industry looking at a disruptor. How do they remain competitive in a market?
Well, in some of the markets, they've only just started getting into meat. They haven't been traditionally big eat meaters, but even then, when you look at the more sophisticated supply of product, it's in the ready-to-eat meals. So you look at a value add. I guess if you see the horizon coming, I mean, like you milk it, pardon the pun, as much as you can. But if you see a horizon coming, you're going to have to change, and you're going to have to look at an alternative way of doing things. I'm not 100% sure that meat will completely, go out of fashion. I think there'll still be a market for meat, but it's just how you deliver it, I think, maybe.
Well, I think it's the evolution of any category, right? It's innovation. I mean, jerky wasn't a thing a decade ago, right? It is now. So, meat consumption occasions will evolve into other occasions, and they'll find different uses for value-add propositions to support their business. And if you don't evolve and you don't adapt, you'll go the way of the dinosaur, and that's competition. That ends up with great outcomes for consumers.
Which probably comes back to your point, Najib, about you've got to have your point of difference and keep looking at it and making sure it meets the market. Yeah.
Having a reason to believe.
And reason to believe. Can go home with that motto ringing in your heads. It's a good one.
My wife is a primary school teacher, and she says the best way to teach anything is to say it in threes. So reason to believe.
Excellent. We thank your wife for that. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for your attention, for coming along to this session later in the day, to hearing two excellent speakers. Could you join me in thanking Nicholas Sims and Najib Lawand?